Hi everybody, this is Dr. Paul Terrio here, and I'm talking to you about why I think getting a homeopathic is a lovely idea and the potential health benefits getting a homeopathic remedy can have. So, for those of you who don't know, homeopathy is a system of medicine that basically promotes your own body's ability to heal. People very often get stuck into places where their body's just not functioning very well. And homeopathic remedy is, in my experience, the best thing to get people unstuck from that and get them out of wherever they have been stuck in their lives, both physically, mentally, and spiritually. If you don't know much about homeopathy, I did a previous video on it, and you can just find it in the same YouTube channel. You just need to go to my videos page, and it'll come down there as as introduction to homeopathy. So, homeopathy is basically the administration of a substance. We usually refer to it as a remedy that helps your body get unstuck from wherever it is. When we give a remedy, it has the effect of just helping your body shift itself out of patterns. These patterns are interesting. There are times when you can give people the best nutrition. They're in a very non-toxic environment, they're healthy, happy, but their body is not functioning effectively. In homeopathy, we usually believe this indicates that there's a disorder of the vital force that's happening. These disorders were very challenging to treat before homeopathy existed, but now we can simply use the remedy to help people get out of those disordered patterns. They can be both on a physical level. I mean, homeopathy does work physically. We know this both through the clinical studies and the laboratory studies, but it also is on a mental, emotional level, and that's where I think homeopathy really shines. It shifts it out of it. Let's see. You may also, once you find a remedy that works for you, you may also find old fears, tendencies, irritations, and issues slowly resolving. A lot of the time, what's mentally troubling us or what's mentally not functioning terribly well is simply being held in place by this pattern of stuckness. The experience of this is actually quite interesting. Initially, on getting the remedy, most people just feel really relaxed. They often get pretty sleepy. I've had a couple people just pass out on my table after I gave them the remedy, and I'm not going to bother them, so I just let them sleep it off. But they often find themselves just being able to move past their previous limits. If previously they had a certain emotional thing that would get triggered by a certain set of circumstances, they may find that is much less so or even completely gone. Their health issues will often shift as well. Sometimes they'll resolve completely, like sometimes all a person needs is a remedy, but even if they don't, their health will become far more responsive to other things. It may be that, they need a remedy and a couple of acupuncture needles or a remedy and a supplement, but whatever happens, their health will shift to a better level, and even if we don't completely resolve their health problem with the homeopathic, it's likely that it will become far more responsive to whatever else we're going to do. And gradually, our people move under homeopathic treatment. People move on to progressively greater states of health. Health is an interesting thing in and of itself. Coming up with the definition of health is very challenging. I know the WHO has tried, but I don't find their definition terribly good. For me, health is three things. Health is freedom, the ability to choose what you actually actively want to do in your life. Joy, just an inner sense of fulfillment. And growth, a sense of expansion and of us getting better, getting more whole, becoming bigger and better people, in a sense. But health is not an even process. If you've watched my previous videos, you've seen this diagram before. Health often, particularly in modern people, or in people in the contemporary world, often kind of looks like kind of constantly upwards roller coaster. So if you look at the far left, usually when people come to see me, that they start Let's just say that the up-down axis is a person's level of health, and the side-to-side axis is time. So when people start to see me at the bottom left, they're often at a relatively low state of health. We get them on an initial treatment plan. In this case, we're discussing homeopathy, but could be anything. It could be homeopathy, acupuncture, diet, herbal medicine. When we get them on that initial plan, their health improves. Their body is like, oh my god, I feel wonderful. Eventually their body they hit a bit of a plateau, and quite often when this plateau happens, their body is very much like, will start redirecting things to another issue that it wasn't able to address. We come up with a new plan, treat that. Maybe the person needs another homeopathic, or maybe they need a shift of therapy. The same process occurs. Each time we solve a new problem, the body gets to a higher and higher and higher state of health. In homeopathy, there's about two phases. The first of which is immediately after, when a person is under the influence of the remedy and they're moving forward with their lives. They feel fantastic. They feel like nothing's really bothering them. They feel like they're able to deal with everything and that they're finally moving forward. I euphemistically refer to this as the zone. But almost always another issue comes along. The amount of time this may take is quite variable. I've had some people move on to remedies, like they need a new remedy every month. They just burn through them really quickly. I've had other people stay on the same remedy for, I think my record is 2.5 years, but eventually that person too had another issue come up. So, but I will add, quite often when people get into a new place where they're stuck, a new place that they can move forward from, it's a lot more pleasant than the first one. If they're somewhat stuck the first time, or if they're very intense with their first state, the second state won't be as bad, and the third state far less. Eventually people just come in and call me up and like, Paul, I'm in a new state. I'm like, all right, come in. And they're able to take me exactly into where they are in, a few minutes, which is wonderful. So, however, it's very rare that people just get stuck randomly. There is a deep developmental order that we've noticed over the last few decades, both in terms, mostly from homeopathy, just because it's very concrete in homeopathy how people are developing. It's less random. We have external guideposts we can reference, and I'll explain those in a minute. But there's a very beautiful picture or order of human development, and people tend to move through it. If you give a person a remedy that fits one sort of stage in human development, usually they'll move on to a subsequent stage of human development and need a remedy from that place. So it's quite beautiful. As people get this treatment, they move forward in terms of their human development, and that is just a gorgeous process. So, I term these stages of human development the layers. Basically, since about 1993 or 1996, we've had the discovery of a number of patterns within homeopathy that allow us to see remedies as members of groups. The first person who did this, who did the original work in the 90s, was Jan Scholten. He did an excellent job plotting homeopathics made out of minerals on the periodic table. So there they are. There's the periodic table. It's quite a lovely structure. So originally in homeopathy, we would know, for instance, phosphorus and sulfur and mercury and gold and sodium and magnesium and potassium and calcium. We didn't know those remedies as anything other than themselves. But Jan's brilliant insight, and it really was like that. If they gave Nobel Prizes for homeopathy, Jan would have won one for this insight. It was brilliant. Was to place those on the periodic table and see if there was a sequence. And there was a very, very clear sequence. There was so he came up with two divisions. He came up with the rows, so the ones that go up and down. They each have particular things in common, the rows go side to side, and the columns, which go up and down. Each of the rows and each of the columns has things that they share together. And it was a beautiful insight that he created. So, this system has actually been replicated by other people. Tina Smits, who developed both inspiring homeopathy and cease therapy, came up with he actually replicated those layers, he called them layers, and I term them layers as well. He came up with a structure of homeopathic remedies, or a sequence of remedies, and they used different remedies than Scholten did in what Scholten would equate as a series, Tinus would call a layer, but the layers and series were almost identical. So they covered the same issues, just using different remedies. That was also in the 90s and the 2000s. I believe I became aware of it in 2012, but I know she'd been doing it for a few decades before that. A woman named Mikhail Yakir did a similar thing with plants, and inspired by Yakir, I myself, Paul Terrio, am doing the animals, and I'm finding the same structures. Each of these structures, each of these patterns has the same basic elements. I use the word layers because I learned quite a lot from Tinus, not in person, but through his students, and I think it's just the most clear terminology. You can call them series, columns, anything else you want, but I'm just referring to them as layers right now for linguistic clarity. There are 8 of them. I think we're going to go through them right now. The first layer is about incarnation. Do I really want to be here or not? Do I exist? Is it safe to exist? These are the basic issues. They're covered in the periodic table. They're the hydrogen series. In the animals, they're the sponges and possibly the lancets. The lancets and the other members of the chordate phyla that are a little bit before the vertebrates proper. I'm still exploring that, so that one's tentative. And in the plants, they're the Magnolidae and the Elismatidae. Forgive me if I butcher the pronunciations. It's been a long time since I studied botany. But this layer is a very interesting one. It's basically a layer of us separating ourselves from wherever we come from before birth and deciding whether or not we actually want to be here in a physical body in this world. It's a huge step for a being that's developing. The second layer is the layer of separateness. Deciding you want to be in a physical body doesn't kind of make you into an individual. The second layer is literally kind of creating this barrier between you and the outside world. The idea of where do I stop and where do you begin, that Yakir so eloquently put it as. Smallness and aloneness. You were previously part of this almost universal energy, and now you're just yourself in this tiny little body. You feel really small and alone. The carbon series have this metaphor of the birth process, separating yourself from your environment, and particularly separating yourself from your mother. It's also a very beautiful process. It's covered by the carbon series in the minerals, the Hamelidae, and the Ericads, or the Hamelids and the Ericads, which interestingly enough contains marijuana as a plant. Just an FYI. In the animals, there's the echinoderms, the cnidarians. So the cnidarians are like jellyfish and coral, and the echinoderms are starfish and sea cucumbers and crinoids, which are sea lilies and a few other things. The fish as well, and maybe the brachiopods. Brachiopods are a phyla I've just acquainted myself, as of today. Today is March 28th, 2015. So I've just become acquainted with the fact that there are remedies from this phyla a few days ago, and I'm not terribly sure, but they seem to be in this area. So that may change. So, if you do purchase my book, that I may change that as I research it more. So I'll just include that as, this is the cutting edge, but it may change over time. So the third layer is the layer of identity. It's a beautiful layer. All the layers are beautiful. But once you've kind of become separate from the world around you, then becomes the question of who are you? What do you want? What are your own innate characteristics? Before you separated yourself off, you didn't have any innate characteristics. You were just part of everything. Now that you're a separate being, what is this separate being like? There's often a little bit of hostility to this. quite often the outside world, the world that's not you, is perceived as somewhat threatening. This can be quite a challenge for many beings. There can be often a great deal of issues with conflict and hostility and other things. And in children, you can often see it in like kids who want to do it their way. So it's a very interesting one. I happen to think that we have a pre-existing kind of identity or feeling to ourselves, and that the third layer involves just imprinting our bodies with this pre-existing set of characteristics. But, that's an interpretation. You can take it or you can leave it. In terms of remedies, this is covered by the silica series and the minerals. It's covered by the charophyllates, which are kind of cactuses and spinaches and things in the plants. It's covered by the amphibians and reptiles and the vertebrates. The amphibians are interesting because they're kind of layer 2 and 3 at once. The reptiles are very clearly layer 3. And the annelids. The annelids are the earthworms. So you get remedies like arenicola and leech and earthworm that are all about just, who am I? What do I want to do? And each one of those remedies would have a particular factor that would just be stopping them from completing this layer. The fourth layer. I call this layer the layer of the nest. It's the layer about building a secure environment for yourself, and often, extensions of yourself, like your family and your people. The big issue is loving and nurturing and caring and providing. Being quite often in women who are people who are socialized into kind of a women's or female role, stereotypically I'm speaking, I'm not endorsing this, there's an issue about love, nurturing, caring for others. For people who are socialized into more male roles, there's an issue with providing, protecting, doing your job. The point in this layer is basically the ability to exist and take care of yourself in this very interesting world that we are. The ability to make sure that your physical body and the physical bodies that are dependent on you can continue on. In the irons, in terms of remedies, we can see this as in the minerals, it's the iron series. In the plants, it's the delenids and the comelids. And in the animals, it's the mollusks and possibly the dinosaurs. The dinosaur remedies, there's 2 right now. I intend on adding to that. But we don't really know much about them. So I'm tentatively suggesting they may do that, but I'm not as sure. So you'll have to consult my book whenever it gets done, and my various ebooks that I will be publishing on this subject. The fifth layer. The fifth layer is all about difference. Previously, in layers 1 to 3, we're all dealing with kind of ourselves, extensions of ourselves. In the fifth layer, we're finally realizing that there's things that are really quite different than we are. And we have a relationship with them, either direct or indirect. And we need to deal with that. As well, there's issues of difference within the self. Coming up with different ideas, such as, being creative, being inspired, is really strongly dealt with. And there's also issues of conflict with others, anger, victimization, bullying, things of that nature. This is all how we deal with things that are different than us. In terms of the minerals, there's the silver series. Plants, there's the rosids and the lilids. In terms of animals, there's the arthropods, which are very strong, and the mammals. The mammals have they span layer 5 and 6. But for the most part, it's for them. But they have a very strong fifth element layer in them, particularly the marsupials. The sixth layer is our place in the world. We aren't just individuals, we exist as part of a social context. You'll see that kind of our focus as we proceed through these layers gets larger and larger. This is a big expansion. We're not just going to paying attention to our own personal relationship to other things. We are looking at our place within this whole system, this whole web of ecology or social relationships or what have you. There's often issues of leadership, management, setting examples, but also things like politics, guilt, and again, conflict with others, persecution when social structures aren't being nice to you. This happens. The key issue here is having a relationship with the world that lets us express who we are and lets us thrive. Lets us kind of fulfill our own potential. In terms of remedies, we have the gold series here. We have the lilids again. We have the asterids. We have the mammals again. And the insects in particular. Not all insects. Many insects are in layer 5. But a good number of insects kind of have this 6th layer thing. Like, for instance, the Coleoptera, the beetles are quite into this, are quite in this layer. Next is the 7th layer. 7th layer is an interesting one. It really is about where we are supposed to be. Each one of us has an individual destiny, a role we are meant to fulfill in the world. A calling, if you will, or the affinity of our soul to do a particular thing. Each one of us has this, but if you're listening to this, not everyone is aware of that. Many people aren't. This idea of a destiny or a calling is quite an advanced one. You kind of have to fulfill most of the previous layers in order to achieve this. So many people don't. Many people who just get stuck in the lower layers don't end up doing this. It's difficult to communicate, but when you reach this place, it's like, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is my calling. There's a great joy and a great fulfillment you get from doing these things. It's a really beautiful thing to see, in particular to see in your patients. In terms of remedies, there are several. In the minerals, there are the lanthanides. In the animals, there's the birds, the Lepidoptera, and the Diptera, and there may be more. Lepidoptera is butterflies, and Diptera are the flies, and there don't appear to be any plants at this time. The 8th layer is a very interesting one as well. Strangely enough, in homeopathy, the 7th and 8th layers, those groups of remedies, are really only recent additions. Their extensive use has only been pioneered over the past maybe 20 or 30 years. I find that very interesting that we're in a culture where we are moving towards a greater realization of these 2 layers, and those remedies suddenly become available. The 8th layer, our sense of the world becomes transpersonal. Transpersonal means beyond the self, literally. We start to identify ourselves not just with our bodies or with our small sense of ourselves, but with more of the things around us. We gradually expand. It's a very beautiful state. If you're curious, this is where my remedy is, so I understand it quite well. You start to move a little bit beyond yourself. And it doesn't mean that the self doesn't exist. It just means your focus changes to things that are bigger than the self. The problem, however, is with this, that this expansion is very difficult. We often disintegrate or lose coherence of ourselves. Sometimes there's even kind of a feeling of exploding, or just there's so much power there that we just can't contain it, and like kaboom. So it's a very challenging thing. Appropriately, with the sense of disintegrating and exploding, the remedies for this are the actinides. The actinides are the radioactive elements, like americium and plutonium and uranium and radium and californium and so forth. Jan Schulten has also suggested the fungi as this, and I find that a very fascinating idea, although I haven't explored it yet, so I couldn't comment one way or the other. I think it may be true, but we need to confirm it more extensively before we accept that. So, this is just kind of an overview of the plant issues. It's pretty simple. It's a very basic structure, but I highly recommend Yakir's work. She's got a preliminary book published, and her upcoming book, or her large 800-page book called Wondrous Order, is hopefully going to be published by the end of 2015. I hope so. I'm hoping it gets published because I am super eager to read it. I'm looking forward to that book. So, we've already discussed Jan Schulten's work in terms of the minerals. His book also, it's called Homeopathy and the Elements, and it's a very beautiful book, and I highly recommend it as well. My book, my is the table of animals. A preliminary table will probably be published in the next few months, but the preliminary work, I am planning on releasing just an introduction and the porifera, so the sponges, for free. So you can go to my website, tableofanimals.com, and get those things. And there's also going to be a number of triturations published on there, a number of other projects, and ways if you can help, if you want to help with this. So this is just a preliminary version of the table. I didn't include brachiopods yet, but these are mostly invertebrate phyla. It's pretty interesting, and it parallels Yakir's and Schulten's work quite a bit. And there's the chordates. So the vertebrates, but vertebrates with their immediate non-vertebrate ancestors. So when a person gets their remedy, when they get freed from whatever layer they're in, and it's the right remedy, they tend to gradually become free of wherever they were stuck, what we term their state, and move forward in their growth. For instance, here's a case. I smushed 2 or 3 cases that I've had together to this, but it's a kind of a typical example. So the first remedy, let's say that the person's big issues were that they came in to see me and they just didn't know if they had the social context to be alive in. They didn't know if they could rely on other people to help them. That's a very spongia thing. So we prescribe spongia, and the person might be able to move out from that. They may be able to, hey, I am fully here for the first time in my life. I am super happy. They might stay like that for a couple of months or weeks or years or what have you. Eventually, another issue will emerge. Let's say the person moves to sacrum off. The state of sacrum off is, which is sugar. It's the plant that they make sugar out of. It's sugar cane. The state of sacrum off, which is very well explored by Tina Smith, is one of I feel like I just don't have the love to survive here. It's a very interesting and very sad and very beautiful state. So our patient gets into that state. We prescribe sacrum off. She feels like, yes, I have the love I need. I can love myself, and I have the love that I need in order to live in the world. Third remedy might be she might just move a little bit forward in terms of the same series, but get Ferrum Phos, which I've noticed is often a remedy people need in order to fully incarnate. It's a beautiful remedy too. The next remedy might be she might be struggling to find her purpose in life. It's like, what do I want to do? How do I do it? How do I go about doing it? I'm not sure. Cerium phosphate, which is a lanthanide, might be the best remedy for her. And then after that, another remedy where she's just expanding herself out, but having difficulties kind of doing that. Americium, let's just say, hypothetically, the Americium myrrh might be the best. Each phase, we get an increase in awareness and an increase in health, and she becomes more and more advanced, both in her personal development and in terms of her health. We all remember this. As a further note, it is a personal sort of observation of mine that I think everyone who gets one of these remedies and moves forward in their growth, just by their impact, by their being in a human body, kind of moves the entirety of humanity forward just a step. We have a collective consciousness, and when one of us moves forward in terms of our growth, the rest of us do too. By getting a remedy, we are literally moving the entire planet forward. And I think that's just a beautiful process. So, there's not much more I can say about that. If you would like to actually do this with me, if you would like to get a remedy yourself, you can contact me. Email is probably best, at drpalterio@gmail.com. And if I don't know, if I can't, help you, if you're not local to me, I can help you. I will try my darndest to help you find someone who's able to take care of you that way. My website's drpalterio.com and tableofanimals.com. And there's my phone number, and you can also follow me on Twitter. And thanks very much for, helping me and watching this video and taking the time to listen to my thoughts on this. I hope you all enjoyed them. And I'd love to hear from you about, your thoughts and comments and opinions and what have you. So take care, and we'll talk soon, and I hope you enjoyed this. Bye!